Today, we welcome to the program Lee Drutman, who's the author of the book Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop, the Case for Multi-Party Democracy in America. Also, co-host of the podcast Politics in Question and a senior fellow in the political reform program at New America. And by the way, I was hoping to surprise him with this, but he was told, guest number 1000 on the David Pakman Show. Unique guest. Now, some guests have appeared many times, but we're saying not interview 1000 Lee, but guest 1000, which I feel like is a more precise metric.
Yes, and it's important to have precision in your metrics, or else you mismeasure and you lead to erroneous conclusions.
Right. And so I guess maybe we'll apply that to our first topic, which is in assessing the two-party doom loop that we have, as you call it. Do you have a sense of how to measure whether the Republican and Democratic Party right now on policy are closer or further apart than they've been historically?
Well, I think they are not super close together, but I mean, actually, this is something that scholars of democracy around the world do try to measure. And, compared to a lot of other countries, which just have a broader spectrum of parties because they have multiple parties. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party are not super far apart on policy. There's actually probably more in common in a lot of policy areas. What they are divided on is geography and identity and culture. And, there's a real sense that Democrats and Republicans feel like the other party represents a very different and each of them extreme version of what America ought to be. And so the real divide is more about social polarization than I think it is about policy polarization.
Over the last couple of years, we've seen, on the one hand, this idea that Trumpism is something different from what the Republican Party has been for the last decade or 15 years or so, or maybe in the post-Reagan era, we could even say, of the last 30 years. And yet, at the same time, we have actually seen Republicans, by and large, get behind Donald Trump with rare exceptions. So what's your sense of whether the Republican Party is fractured at this time?
Well, I mean, American parties are always fractured because they're these big tent parties, in a sense. They're trying to represent half of the country. I mean, so yeah, there I think are a few different visions of what the Republican Party ought to be within the Republican Party. And Donald Trump is sort of the vessel for at least two of those visions, and it organizes the Republican Party not around a positive vision of what Republicans ought to stand for, but as a combative force fighting the Democrats, trolling the libs. I mean, that's the motivating force of the Republican Party right now, is preventing Democrats from being in power. It's very much a sense of negative partisanship. And when you ask a lot of Republicans what they like about Donald Trump, they like that he's a fighter. Right? I mean, it's not that they like his particular policies. They like that he's fighting for them. And I think that is the way that he holds a party together, that I think if they actually had to have a disagreement or had to have a debate on policy, you'd actually find much more diversity in the party.
It's before we move on to how we might break this two-party system that we have. It seems to me, as someone who's on the left, that a fractured Republican Party is good for the left. And when I look at what's happening in Georgia, if you have some Republicans who are saying we've got to vote, and then others who are saying, hey, the whole thing is rigged, maybe just boycott it and stay home, and Trump's going after the governor and Secretary of State of Georgia, that type of chaos seems like it would be good for the left. What's your sense of that?
I mean, it's good. I'm not sure if it's good for... I mean, maybe not. I mean, I think one of the challenges is that unless there's like a real genuine split in the party in which the party actually breaks apart, Now, a lot of folks are, going to decide, well, I think this has been kind of a through line. There's a lot of folks on the right who say, well, Trump is kind of boorish and I don't like his tweeting and maybe he shouldn't have done this, but I can't vote for the Democrats, so I guess I have to vote for the Republicans and, hope that eventually this dies out. I don't think so much as what's, I consider myself on the left, but I think more about what's good for the country and what's good for the continuation of our democracy. And, I think that having a fractured and chaotic party that can only be unified by an authoritarian, cult of personality cult leader, which I guess is probably the best description of Donald Trump, is very dangerous. That you need a center right or a right party that believes in the basic idea that you have free and fair elections and those elections are legitimate. And we don't have that right now, and that is the true danger. So maybe there'll be some fracture, and there'll be a faction of the party that says, look, whatever disagreements we have with the left, we agree that we have to have a democracy with free and fair elections, and that is the cornerstone of our system. And we can argue about tax policy later, but the first thing we have to agree on is that you have elections that are legitimate.
So what would have to change for the U.S. to go more in the direction of having at least one more party that's regularly viable? A few of the things I've talked to my audience about include changing how politics is financed, would probably be near the top of the list. Also, potentially changing first past the post voting, at least within states, so that the spoiler effect, which keeps a lot of people from going in the direction of an alternative to Democrats and Republicans, would probably be near the top of the list. Do you agree with these two items? What other items would you add?
Yeah, I certainly support campaign finance reform, but I think the real reason why we have just two parties is because we have a voting system, first past the post, plurality, single winner elections, in which votes for third parties, new parties, minor parties are effectively wasted. And so all the energy and focus goes into the top two parties, and it's very hard for new parties to emerge. Now, the U.S. is an outlier in this respect. Most of the world's democracies have proportional voting systems that do not punish smaller parties. Most democracies around the world are proportional multi-party democracies, and there's certainly a range of rules that can structure the party competition. I think a healthy number of parties is probably between 4 and 6. I'm not suggesting that we become Israel and have 13 parties. And Israel uses a very extreme form of proportional representation that neither I nor most people who study electoral systems would recommend. I think the model here should be something more like Ireland, which uses multi-member districts, typically 3 to 5 member districts with a ranked choice voting. So they just call it proportional representation. I think another model, and this might work better for the Senate, although it would require a constitutional amendment, is what New Zealand does, which is people elect representatives for their legislative district, and then they have a second party list vote in which they vote for a party, and the parties get effectively compensatory seats in the legislature based on how well they do on the party list, so that it ensures that if 53% of people want Democrats have 53% of the seats, not just how Democrats and Republicans happen to shake out in particular states or districts.
How do you build consensus to even change that system, right? Because, even the conversation about electoral vote versus popular vote to pick the president, one party has benefited from the fact that we have an electoral college, and one party has lost out on multiple presidents in the White House as a result of that. So there's a large portion of those in power who have no incentive to change that system. How do we get over that hump?
There are some people in power who want to maintain the status quo, but I would say a few things. One, if you talk to most people in power, elected Democrats, elected Republicans, a lot of them feel like things are really broken, and they feel stuck in this system, and they feel trapped in this system, and they, don't actually want, in their preferred world, they wouldn't just be foot soldiers in an endless partisan trench warfare where they keep digging deeper and deeper holes. Now, I think within the Democratic Party and within the Republican Party, as we were discussing, there are different factions, there are different groups that feel like they have a vision for how politics ought to be, and that vision is suppressed in this current binary hyperpartisan system in which nothing actually happens because the parties are kind of deadlocked. So, I think there are enough people in elected office, maybe not the heads of their parties, but who might say, look, this system isn't working for us, and maybe we can try a different system in which maybe we get to play a different role, perhaps a better role in actually working out legislative compromise and trying to solve problems instead of just fighting each other in endless messaging wars in which all this money is wasted just to fight to basically the same point that we've always been. I mean, for all the money that has been spent on this election, it's remarkable how little movement there was among voters. I mean, it was basically the same outcome as 2016 and the popular vote, with Biden winning a little more, and Biden did a little bit better in a handful of states, and that
yes,
was the game.
It's that very, very, very well said. So we've talked a little bit about the Republican Party. We've talked about multi-party possibilities. To talk a little bit as we get down to the end of our time about the Democratic Party. There was a modest amount of sort of never Biden sentiment during the primaries and even shortly after Joe Biden. It became clear Joe Biden would be the Democratic nominee. But in the end, most Democratic voters did vote for Joe Biden, even if they would have preferred someone more progressive. Is the Democratic Party likely, or how likely is it to fracture in a significant way between the sort of bulk of the party and the progressive wing?
Well, I mean, I think that the fights will continue. I mean, a fracture would be significant, and I think Democrats unified around Biden because they wanted Trump out of office.
Yes,
so that it was, if you looked at polls, it was not a resounding, vote of enthusiasm for Joe Biden as much as it was a resounding vote of get Donald Trump out of office, and now who knows? I mean, I think the progressive left feels like it doesn't have a lot of room to maneuver given the narrow majorities that Democrats have in the House. On the other hand, it gives them more leverage, but the threat of Trump winning in 2024 or somebody Trump-like winning in 2024. I mean, this is the problem with our closely fought binary politics, is that everybody is just trying to win the next election, and so there's all this we're not going to discuss ideas, we're not going to have debates about policy, we just have to make the Republicans look bad, we just have to keep them out of office, and then we have the luxury of having an actual discussion over policy because we can't fracture, and that's just the kind of stasis that politics is in. I mean, politics has to be dynamic. There have to be fights, and there have to be disagreements, and there has to be uncertainty, and there have to be opportunities to form new and different coalitions. But we're in this kind of frozen state in which everybody feels like they're losing. Everybody feels like just one election and the entire character of America will be destroyed, and it creates this incredible sense of frustration. Meanwhile, there are real problems that we have to deal with. Climate, I think, being to me the most important and existential. That we're just ignoring.
Yeah, I am less concerned, as you're pointing out, the fact that there would be disagreement within or between parties, but even within we're kind of talking about here. I'm less concerned by that, and that's less of a sign that of a problem in the Democratic Party. For me, the concern comes if there is a wing that is representing a significant number of Americans that seems to never actually get anything for those constituents that are in line with them. That is more of a concern for me than the fact that there are disagreements or even factions, because that actually seems completely natural and healthy the way you're pointing out.
Yeah, it is natural and healthy. And if we were in a multi-party system, there would be a social democratic party,
Mm-hmm.
and there would be a moderate centrist center left party, and then those parties could go directly to the voters rather than having to compete in different primaries. And we'd know what the popularity of their different programs were, and then those would be bargaining chips as they worked out legislative solutions. Instead, there's a sense that Democrats have to hold together. They have to win that majority, which means they have to win those, slightly conservative suburban districts, which means they can't do anything too progressive. And that's just the way the math works.
Yeah, no question about it. We've been speaking with Lee Drutman, who's author of Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop, the case for multi-party democracy in America. He also co-hosts the podcast Politics in Question and is a senior fellow in the political reform program at New America. Lee, I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, David. This was a great conversation, and I hope folks think about this as a serious solution to our gridlocked and broken politics.